Good evening and welcome to this Department of History Professional Development session. This evening we are joined by Colby Grothoff, an area teacher here at Peet Junior High in Cedar Falls. He is a graduate of the UNI History Department and its teacher education program. He currently teaches 9th grade US history. He coaches 9th grade football, high school wrestling, and junior high boys track. And I've asked Colby to speak tonight a little bit about his trajectory from UNI student to gainfully employed teacher. He's going to tell us a little bit about how he landed his current position and the path that got him to that job, and talk a little bit about how his UNI history degree in teacher education helped him achieve those goals. So Colby, please take it away. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Yes, thanks for having me. It was fun to have that opportunity when you reached out, and we were initially planning on a panel in person, and that changed drastically. So
indeed,
I'm glad we can end up making that work. So. Okay. Yeah, so where were you at you were kind of cutting on that last part. Was it just
It was just your introduction and telling you a little bit about what your presentation is going to be tonight. So the floor is entirely yours. Tell us a little bit about your job. Tell us a little bit about how you landed the job and how your UNI degree has been put to good use in the years since your graduation in 2015.
Sure, yeah. So yeah, I ended up applying. I started at a smaller school in more rural Iowa, in Grundy Center, actually. I was the one-man social studies teacher there. That was my first job. I actually hopped in mid-trimester. They were on trimesters, and basically thrown in, and here you go, you know, type of teaching, which was probably the best thing for me in that regards. But I always wanted to end up back in Cedar Falls. I spent 5.5 years at UNI, all in the history department. Took many classes, obviously, in that time period. And I knew history was kind of what I wanted to do. I tell myself now I was in 6th grade when I knew it. I don't know what you know in 6th grade. Some friends were NFL players. Social studies was the class that the cultures, everything else stuck out to me. And I did social studies teachers throughout. There's one on here I'd give a prod to, and probably get embarrassed, but I had him as a high school teacher. And he, you know, made class fun, the class that I actually wanted to go to, you know, in that regard. And it was just history. I wanted to do everything, constantly questioning, and I'm the guy that could sit there and take notes, and when we move on to something else, I wanted more in that respect. So, and then I got to move on and go through the same program a lot of my former teachers got to. So that was pretty exciting in that regard. So I actually ended up going, did my level 1, which I know we'll touch on further down. And my application got lost, I guess I was told, out of the 300 people that were in the Price Lab auditorium. And it was the next day, and I kept emailing, and something got misplaced. I ended up having English, language arts, something that was not necessarily a strong passion for me because I wanted history. I was like, man, this is what I come to UNI for. And my first skill experience was language arts. So being kind of the naive, not really knowing, still getting the hang of freshman college, first couple weeks in, I think I probably went in with not the best attitude that I could have. But I got to see the teaching side of everything. It didn't matter the content. I fell in love with just helping the students. I had a great teacher, mentor teacher at East High that I was a part of, that I still kept in touch with through this last year. And I kind of wasn't quite sure and I ended up having my next field experience at Peet Junior High, where I'm at now. I actually had a couple doors down with the teacher that I ended up really sparking me back, just seeing how fun he had teaching. Not as much how much fun the kids had teaching, which they always were, but seeing the joy that he got out of it was, to me, I was like, okay, this is kind of why I got into this. He's got the kids where they need to be set up for learning, but he's loving every minute of it, which attests to that too. So, yeah, that ended up being along my way, which it looks like I'll touch more on as we get a little bit further down. So, yeah, I ended up subbing. I graduated in the fall of 2015. Obviously anxious to get a job right away. You apply everywhere. I interviewed in different corners of the state, thought about teaching just anywhere just to get my feet in the door. I was still working. I ended up subbing in 11 different districts close to the Cedar Valley. They're different schools, I guess, but I thought that was what it was going to be for a while, and going through the praxis and all that, getting through all that, getting my license, and I ended up being fortunate enough to get the Grundy Center job. They were a 6-period day, and I loved every minute there. I truly did. But I was teaching 5 different preps in a 6-period day. And as a first-year teacher, everyone's always in your room because you can't tell them no yet, necessarily. And I also ended up getting a lot of the at-risk students in my room in planning time because there was too much of a workload between the at-risk coordinators. So, yeah, my first year teaching was, wow. I look back now and it's a blur. Honestly, it was one of my most favorite times, though, because it really taught me and put in perspective what teaching is. I remember my first week just almost panicking. Oh, my gosh, all this content, how do I give it? That's not necessarily everything, which obviously any of us could attest to, and that we'll get to, but it was a complete panic. I kind of lost focus of what I was doing, and I ended up finding in my bottom left drawer in my house that I lived in Waverly. I pulled out all my multiple ring notebooks from UNI and all my history classes, all of them full, and ended up looking back through that. When you start thinking, I don't remember all this stuff, and you look back and you just realize kind of the different techniques or fashions that the professors taught that in. I use that. I mean, I still go back and look at that stuff when we go back through and do our pacing guides and everything. So it's pretty remarkable to look back on that and see your progression, going forward with that. So, yeah, I taught there for about 3 years, and then I ended up wanting to move on. As I mentioned, I always wanted to get back in UNI area. Cedar Falls was my home for 6 years. It was hard to leave. I always lived around that area, so I was very fortunate to get an interview and then a second interview as well, moving forward. So intimidating when you know some of those teachers, especially when Mr. Christopher's in on the interview, and you look up and you're like, oh man, he had me in class. See right there. But no, it was fun, and you can be able to look back and hear from other UNI professors and how some are thankful you're back in the area, and it's very gratifying. We do so much work with UNI too, with field experiences and helping others with mock interviews, just telling them different museums. So, hey, there's a Grout Museum, the Historical Society, all that. It's just resources for them to use. That Rod Library place that most people live at. How to utilize that appropriately. So, yeah, that would have been, I guess, my not so long, but abrupt journey, and I couldn't love it more where I'm at. Like I said, it was my dream job to get into Cedar Falls, and the staff I have, especially in my wing, it's every day. It's just fun to go to work. The kids are awesome, and I wouldn't take that back. And as I told Dr. McNabb, getting back to the UNI where you spend so much time and then prepping you for that, it's always a joy in that sense too. So.
Well, thank you, Colby, for offering some thoughts for me to seize upon with some follow-up questions. So the first thing I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit more about is any advice that you would offer current history teacher ed majors, things that you were really excited about having done at UNI, things you wished you had done but didn't have the opportunity for. You're the sage now, so what advice would you give this generation of students?
Sure. Yes, I guess advice-wise, just kind of moving in, just kind of, I went in and, you know, I wasn't quite sure the direction that I wanted to go. I knew it was history related. I knew it was maybe the education aspect. But I think maybe, you know, my first couple attempts going in, you know, maybe wasn't as wholehearted going in. I mean, I took all my history classes, and then I was kind of getting overwhelmed and then going through a lot of the education experiences. I think my advice would just to be, whenever you think it's kind of, things aren't clicking or you're not quite sure where you're going, just kind of sit down and put into perspective why history? Why was that what you chose in the first place? And I think that'll ultimately kind of draw you back. But, you know, it can be. I mean, some of those can be very demanding, a lot of those history classes, especially if you're taking, say, 12 or 15 credits, you know, it can be, you know, strenuous at times. You know, but when it's all said and done, that's the rewarding part when you look back on it. And I think some of the regrets I had maybe were, you know, I didn't skip class. I knew I couldn't afford to do that. Very seldom, let's just say. But you know, in my eyes, it was, well, hey, you know, then you're not going to miss anything. You know, especially the reading load and all that. I did not get involved. I was saying this before everyone clicked on. I did not get involved in as many of the clubs or anything studying abroad as I obviously wish I would have. You know, looking back, I have to work, you know, I couldn't afford it kind of type of thing as a crutch just because I was kind of scared. But just being what all my friends and coworkers that have been exposed to all the different history clubs and then studying abroad and everything, I think that would have been my biggest regrets, just being involved in as many different, you know, aspects of the history department as you can, or just putting yourself for success anyway.
Talk a little bit about your experience with sports. A lot of teacher education students have some tricks up their sleeve, if you will. They could act as an advisor for the journalism club or the newspaper, or they can coach. Did you have experience with sports in high school, and were you then able to use that to build a professional array of tasks that schools found attractive?
I think so. I think I had a pretty extensive athletic background. Just I think that's coming from a small town. You know, you're involved with everything, and I think that's a testament to is just being involved. And then, you know, it kind of helps you see different aspects, not being afraid to join a club. You know, I panicked in that aspect, but I got into coaching. You know, very similar to teaching. And I ended up just kind of, that helps with me and my organization just so much. I mean, right now my life is, you know, it's been Zoom or, you know, and it's just being dynamic and just kind of flexible in that sense. But I'd be able to become, especially through the coaching background, extremely organized. And it doesn't have to be just coaching, any extracurricular. You learn how to deal with multiple tasks. You know, my first year teaching, doing 3 different sports, probably shouldn't have, but it helped me really balance, you know, my teaching aspect. And then, you know, coaching's a far, far, far second, you know, behind the teaching thing. But I think that is attractive to school districts as well, because you get involved with the students and you kind of see them in a different light, and they really like seeing you in a different light. You know, and then as opposed to the classroom, you know, you're not wearing the slacks and a button-down shirt. So they just see you in a different light, and you really can kind of connect on different levels with them, and especially the smaller districts. I think, you know, that definitely helped me get in my first posting too. So.
great. And I know Chad Christopher and I are often talking to prospective teacher ed students, and he always asks, do you have any experience working with young people? And that's what they cite, is teaching sports, that they're involved in sports activities. And I think your comments are a real endorsement of that as a way to discover your passion for working with young people. I want to talk a little bit about your practical experiences. You talked about some of your level 1 and level 2. How did you find the student teaching experience here, the way it's designed at UNI? Talk a little bit about your success in your student teaching experience. Obviously, your first year, you said it was pretty overwhelming when you got the job, but you feel that your student teaching experience was very helpful in training you for what was coming down the road?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that it's awesome now, or at least when I was there, I got, 4 different levels for field experiences in that sense. So essentially, you get to see 4 different, all student teaching, 5 different with that, different teachers. And when you're at a field experience, another piece of advice, to always pop into other people's classrooms. It doesn't matter that content, but especially the history, obviously. And you just kind of get to see how different people teach, or how they're organized, how they connect with students, what pieces of history they use, or what approach. I was very grateful for that. I got, a field experience basically every year. And like I said, I was in a bigger district, rural districts. I went from, my student teaching even, I was in a very rural, extremely rural district. And then I was in a middle school in Waterloo, and that was very different, the way those 2 districts were. Just the dynamics of students, we could go on and on about that, but seeing how different kids react to, different events or their backgrounds that they have, it was great. I mean, I thoroughly, even like I said, my first level 1, I loved it once I finally got in, and I loved every single field experience that I had. As I move forward, and I still, like I said, I keep in touch with every single one of those teachers. They kind of follow me along through my reference, or they were, trying to land that job. But yeah, you get prepared, because you don't only just go and do a field experience. You come back and you collaborate, like through level 2 or level 3, and I had mine with Mr. Christopher. That whole week you're gone, and you come back and you get to hear different experiences. To me, that's the coolest thing. When you're just sitting in a circle, next thing you know, an hour goes by, and you're all explaining, my teacher did this, my teacher did that, and it's all stuff you remember that you end up starting to do when you're in the real world and teaching, or how they use this, or, yeah, they remember this professor that we had, they're still there, type of thing. So, you have a lot in common. It's the UNI network runs extremely deep, especially around this area. So it was an awesome experience overall, all levels.
Fantastic. We've got a question from the chat box, and the question is, what skills did you learn in the history department that you're now trying to teach your own students?
Sure. Something I struggled with early on was just kind of, I don't know if I'd call it as much pacing or what's more important to learn, because that's so hard when you have such a wide range in history. Like when I used to teach world history, I was like, well, what do I teach? And they say, well, in 2 trimesters, start at the beginning, Mesopotamia, and finish somewhere post-Vietnam. I'm like, wow, what do you pick? You're just flustered. I think what I got to see, and you can go back and see every syllabus that I still had in that front corner of my notebooks that I kept, just kind of the pacing and then the high points and everything that you got to see that those teachers taught about. And the cool thing with that is write down, keep every single resource that those professors give you, because a lot of it's, hey, here's an excellent resource. We might not have time to get to this, like, you get a semester in a class. But yeah, that helped me so much, just seeing kind of a bigger picture thing. Obviously, most, like us history majors, a lot of us can sit there and we want to learn every single tiny thing. And the reality of it, in most 46-minute classes in the education world, you don't get that. There's, I mean, look where we're at right now. I'm teaching World War I with resources online, and that's one of my favorite topics. So, it's just kind of see that pacing and utilize those resources, absorb everything they give you, and, continue to use them. So.
We have another question from a participant who wants to know if you can talk a little bit about what a typical class is like for you. What percentage is lecture? What percentage do you devote to activity? How do you design a course period?
Yeah, sure. I think this has changed a lot too, and everyone goes through that progression your first year teaching, whether you're, quote unquote, thrown to the wolves or you name it. But I'd say I did a lot more lecture in my first year. I was trying to figure out what content I can, kind of get through, what I need to. And like I said, that's when you realize how much time you have. I am very activity-based now. At our current school, we're learning-based, standard-based grading, so we meet these essential learnings, and if our students meet them, everything's rubric-driven. But I am very activity-based. My opener on my screen every day on the projector, almost every day, I have a today in history, then our agenda, and maybe like a warm-up or a bell ringer. That's my engagement piece. You'll get that when you do those unit plans for your level 3 or your methods class. That's my first 5-10 minutes or so. Why I do like it today in history, I connect it back to something that's happening today, even if it's a bit of a stretch, because it gets the minds going, and there's always a connection you can make, or something that a student remembers from the last unit, and you're just like, oh, this is perfect. Things keep kind of spiraling in. And usually break it down. We'll have there's some days that lecture's longer. But I have a learning target on my board every day, what I want them to learn. And that's what we're going to meet. They know that. So they're kind of seasoned or trained to look at that. Whether we do, our push, whether we're looking at primary sources, a short video, a Socratic seminar where they're about to read something, and then we'll go. I am very discussion-based, and I am a firm believer, especially in this freshman grade that I teach, is preparing them with different strategies. So they are constantly in groups, different groups, talking with people they don't ever probably talk to, talking in front of the class. It's, we're teaching skills too, not just, social studies as well. But, and then I always end it with some sort of closure, reflecting on what we talked about that day or what's going to go into the next day. As you can probably tell from this Zoom, sometimes I run out of time. I like to get a little long-winded at times because I can keep going. But I try to make it a point to have my last at least 3 minutes. What did we learn today? Why is it important? Where can we connect it to today or another event in history, in some sense? And I really push current events too. I got that from my former teacher too. We play the same activity. We share a document. We play a little Jeopardy game, I guess, most Fridays or maybe with certain classes, but that gets students exposed to, where they can connect things to what we're learning as well.
So a follow-up question from the chat box deals with our current circumstances. How has the school closure changed your teaching? I'm sure just as you thought you had everything figured out, then suddenly someone changes the tune. So how are you dancing now? What's going on?
Yes, it was very, very difficult when this first went down. We're about to go to spring break, and we hear, hey, Des Moines schools, they left their other 2 days. We'll be fine, everyone says. And next week we know there's more school off. Nobody knows. No one had answers. It's tough, and I'm still living it right now. There's, we have teachers in our building that I've been teaching them my whole life, and they've never experienced this. Right now, what we're doing for school, we're posting, we have Schoology. It'd be like whatever Blackboard source you had online. We're continually posting resources. Not every student has accessibility to Wi-Fi or a computer, so right now nothing's technically graded, just in our district. And we collaborate still. We're big on our professional learning communities at Cedar Falls too, so we still meet once a week, sometimes twice, even 3 times a week over Zoom. And we're preparing resources for our students, things that they can stay active, but to where it's meaningful. And it's not just busy work, I guess. It's tough too, because, a student, I'm giving out right now, and I think at times the other day I thought I was giving out more work than I did when we were in class, just because I'm so, like I said, activity-based and very discussion-based. So it's been hard for me too. And I've been most busy just giving feedback to where students can see it's meaningful. They see the teacher actually reaching back to them, expanding on it. Hey, follow up on this. It takes, a handful of hours every day just doing that. But yeah, that's essentially where we're at. It's what do they need to know in this short period of time, hoping we're going to come back, and that way they're set up. That's kind of every day for them. Couple 15 to 20 minutes a day of work per class. They have 7 periods, so it's tough. I mean, it's definitely different. It's an interesting experience, but hopefully I'm glad something like it's happened. This experience, not the circumstances, but it makes you see how flexible you really need to be, or dynamic to be a good educator too. So.
Fantastic. And a follow-up question for you about your experiences in 2 types of teaching environments. How is teaching junior high different from high school? What lessons did you learn from your experiences?
Yeah, that's, and it probably does differ. I think the main one that I had, I spent more time, I think mostly in the high school setting, through my experiences, just because my level 3 was in a high school too. But yeah, you'll definitely realize kind of it's a weird connection, because at times, middle school students, for instance, and this isn't everywhere, but they're going to do what you tell them to do mostly. It can be something bizarre. They're still kind of into that goofiness a little bit, and that's totally me. And they're willing to do it, whatever challenge it is. I know when I was doing my level 2 at Cedar Falls, we were talking about colonization of Jamestown, and I did take a trip to Mars. You get 3 things to bring, and they were just saying the most obnoxious stuff. And you try doing that in a high school class with juniors and seniors, and they're going to be like just staring at you, dead to rights most likely. But it's all how you build the relationship too, and I think that differs. But also the attention span with a lot of junior high students is very different. Honestly, my first 3-4 years, I was teaching junior seniors mostly. I was teaching them their government class before they could graduate, their last bit of American history, econ, you name it, just required classes that they needed. My very first year, this school year's first day as freshman, that's a big drop. That's an 18-year-old to a 14-year-old. And I guess some of my humor maybe wasn't got, so I guess I've really kind of, turned more into a freshman, I guess. I catch myself at home saying the dumbest things, that I think are dumb that the kids are saying. I've spent more time on TikTok, Instagram, looking at the current trends, what these kids are going to get so I can implement this in. Never was I really doing that with older kids, doing weird dance moves because they think that's cool, but anything to get them to be able to learn and buy in. That's the huge change, I think, is the willingness to learn, but really you can get any student to learn if they'll buy into you, I think, and you build that relationship too. But you still got to have the same ground rules. There's always are you more flexible with the older, the upper class? It depends what relationship you have with them. But you still have those same standards. So if that answers that.
I think it does. And I'll ask my own follow-up, which is, were you particularly drawn to the junior high population as you thought about securing a teaching job? Do you think they're disparate enough sorts of specializations that people are better suited for one environment or the other? Do you think that's a choice people make, or do you just learn to adapt?
I would say from my experience, I always told myself I wanted junior high. You know, I go back to my level 2 at Peet. That's what rejuvenated me back into wanting to be a teacher. And then I ended up from there on out, I taught high school, you know, for the most part. So, you know, I've been in situations where some people are more fit for that junior high level, and some are, okay, totally high school, and that's fine. So that's a tough one. I would still love to get back, at least split sometime, get into the upper level high school classes, you know, in some way, just to keep things fresh, I guess. I love right now where I'm at, the freshmen. They are very challenging. You know, their mindset is very different. They're still going through all those changes. They can be very difficult. They're technically the big dogs in our building. We're a 7, 8, 9 building, so we're prepping them for high school. You know, so it's fun to prep them, but I think that does differ by person. Honestly, you need to do both, though. I mean, that's how UNI does the field experiences. You'll always get both, which is great, but you have to do both, and you'll find which one you click with more. It seems like maybe it's some of my former coworkers maybe got, you know, older. Maybe they want change or whatnot, which I think it's important too. Within the schools, you kind of have that change as well, but ultimately I think it does. I think it's person to person. I would do either. I mean, I loved it, both sides. I was bummed that I couldn't do high school anymore. Thrilled when I got into the freshman game. So, you know, it's a whole nother perspective, that's for sure.
And we've got a question that draws a little bit on some of the stories you've told about your field experiences. You did some work at Peet before your job. What do you think the importance of networking is for teachers, either to get letters of recommendation from some supervisors or to end up leading to employment? This is something that I think a number of us hear, right? This is a common perception that teaching is very much still about who you know, whom you can impress with a field experience. So maybe if you want to talk a little bit about that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of mentioned earlier too, UNI's got such a deep network, especially around this area, but I mean, it's all over. I mean, once you get out and you start following that alumni page, there's posts from people all over, and that, you know, that's just cool. But it is the second you email that teacher that you're coming into their classroom, you know, that's what you got to realize. You know, they'll say, hey, this is your classroom, we're turning it over to you. It's their classroom, right? They're gracious to have you in there. And you leave that impression. I mean, you walk in, you're professional, you do what you need to do. I mean, you take advice, you're reflective with them. But yeah, I put down every single one of my field experiences on my resume. I asked first, you know, and it was nice when I said I had that interview at Peet. I emailed the teacher that I was with, and I said, hey, you probably don't remember me, so I gave this lesson. They're like, yeah, you did the Mars activity, you know, and I was just like, oh, okay. So right now I'm thinking maybe I got a chance at this, but yes, you absolutely keep those connections. UNI professors as well, obviously, keeping in touch with that aspect. Dr. Connors has been able to shoot a little fun at me over the year too now, or a couple of years anyway, Mr. Buchanan and I. In a good way, you know, helping us, and we'll follow that and see all the cemetery pictures too. So we learn. I mean, you learn through all the posts and through social media too. But it is every single person. You want to sit down and, you know, keep that. And I kind of came to find out it is, you know, it's about the people you know, but when you get into the education and the history world, it's about the people that know you too. You know, there's so many more people that are going to know you that you have no idea. You know, professors talk, teachers talk. You know, I was at Cedar Falls School. There's multiple teachers. They're going to know. They're going to talk. You know, most people have gone through all the professors or Mr. Christopher or you name it. You know, so word spread. So you definitely want to keep that network. That'll help you. You know, land. job of your choice, whether it's teaching or just in that history field. But I think that's the most important thing, and leaving that good impression as well.
Well, it sounds like you're talking about being very careful to cultivate a network, not just build a group of people you've once had an experience with, but then following up, keeping those connections alive over time. And I think that's a really important message to communicate to current students, that they need to be mindful of building that network and then maintaining those connections over time. I want to ask a question that I warned you would be coming before we officially started, and that was, you've given us a very glowing impression of the teaching profession. You're obviously incredibly passionate about what you do, and it's easy to see why a student in your class would have a pretty engaged and lively experience. But I asked you maybe to think about a challenge that you experienced either as a coach or a teacher or in your own educational experience, and how you think your time and training at UNI equipped you to come to a successful resolution of whatever challenge you were facing. Any thoughts on that one?
Sure. I can go, I'll go kind of two different ways on that. I think most certainly any of the extracurricular, like I mentioned, that's a huge part of my career as well. I'm a teacher first, I'm a coach second. Early, as you're busy, you have so much more, maybe you have more going on with coaching than you do teaching, but you are a teacher first, and you need to find that balance as well. Whatever extracurricular it is, you have to be able to have that balance and just kind of be able to, how you interact with the kids. That was a very difficult part for me early on. It was difficult saying no in your first year, maybe taking on too many opportunities, as they warned. I got warned at UNI too. That would happen. I'll be fine. I said yes to almost everything. That second year, and I was coaching. I was like, I'm going to soccer meets. I've never been to a soccer meet. I was in the rain. I'm losing purpose or what. But yeah, you really need to be able to balance that and just kind of realize, hey, I'm a teacher first. What do I want these students to know? And then on top of that too is, I think this would attest especially to first couple year teachers maybe, is just kind of the workload. Yes, you're a teacher, but also to your personal life as well. And you got to have your own downtime too. I was finding out, I was in my classroom, get there early, I'd leave there late. I'd just be continually doing these activities, revising them. And Dr. Glasswell, I remember in one of my student teacher meetings, she said, make sure you buy that new pair of shoes. And I never knew what that meant, especially in your first year teaching. And it clicked. You got to take care of yourself too. I mean, the next day is always going to come. There's you're going to have bad days no matter what year you're in. But you still got to take care of yourself. And at the end of the day, reflect on what you're doing. Why did you get into education? Why did you get into history? UNI prepares you for that, or is preparing you for that as we speak, whether you're in the education program or just going through history. I would say, short story, I would say going to a football game at a university, doesn't matter where the Hawkeyes play. And I ended up going to a history class with one of my buddies. I had got those class at like 10 o'clock on Friday, shot down there to hang out with them. And he was in I can't remember the class. It was an auditorium of 3 huge class of history. And I was sitting there and he's just talking, how do they take attendance? He's like, I don't know. Professor doesn't even know me, so forth, whatever. I was like, I've never had that at a history class at UNI. It's like it's personalized. The professors are going to know you, and within that, they're going to know you about a couple weeks. They're going to know you by name, and you're going to continue to develop a relationship with them throughout. I had multiple teachers, multiple different times. And I think UNI offers that to where it appears just from a lot of coworkers too. You don't get that at a lot of places in the level of, education that you get. So I remember more random little tidbits from, sitting in Sara Lee Hall than I thought I ever would. And it's things that I implement into education as well every day. We're saying some little witty joke about diplomacy from Dr. Shepherdson's class. When he was singing the song about Coca-Cola, that popped in my head not that long ago. It kind of took me back a little bit in that sense as well too. So that would definitely be my stance with that, especially.
Outstanding. Yeah, those are some great lessons learned, sincerely. We are joined tonight by another UNI teaching alum, Jeff Buchanan. I'm going to unmute you as well. Jeff, I've had a question from the guests asking if you two could talk a little bit for the benefit of current students about what schools are looking for in the hiring process. Any tips you can give on what looks good on a resume, what to do or not to do in an interview? What are some of the stories that you've heard or things that you've experienced on the job market?
Well, as a history/social studies teacher, you are up against a lot of competition. So like Colby was talking about earlier, networking is huge just to get your foot in the door. In regards to things to prep, obviously he was talking about coaching. Seems like if you're a social studies teacher and you don't coach, you won't get hired. So you want to make sure that whether that's drama or speech or sports or whatever it is, you have things to market for yourself.
So you're talking about coach in a more umbrella kind of fashion. You've got to have some other skills in your toolkit there. Yeah.
You absolutely have to be adaptable. I coach, but I've also, I had to fill in as a debate coach for a year, and I'd never done debate. And I had to be head prom sponsor, and that's not exactly something that's high on my list. But there's a little line in your contract, most contracts that say duties as assigned. So you just have to be adaptable. And Colby's talked about it. You have to be adaptable in the classroom. You got to be adaptable outside the classroom. And something he talked about that I really wanted to catch on with was he mentioned the buy new shoes comment. And that's a really key thing is so many people burn out in the first couple years. I put a rule in for myself that once Friday afternoon that bell hits, I'm not looking at student work. I'm not developing lessons for Friday night and Saturday. I'll get to it Sunday. It's going to get done. If you don't get all the grades done the night before, they'll survive. This is such a high burnout profession that you have to be doing things to protect yourself too, to make sure that you're still enjoying it. So I definitely wanted to make sure that got dropped in too.
A lot of the same things that we encourage of students at UNI, right? That they have to pace themselves and they need to learn the gift of time management and to take care of themselves. Self-care is important. So you're really saying that is something that absolutely carries through into the professional sphere.
Absolutely. That's one of the bigger lessons you've got to learn.
Okay. Colby, thoughts on the job prep process? Any tips or horror stories that you want to share with us?
No, I enjoy interviews. Not proud that I've had so many, trying to land those first couple jobs. Even had a few after my first job, but no, I don't think. I think with the worst case I would have had is I talk a lot, because that's pretty evident. I can ramble on a little bit. But the thing I think landing those jobs
too easy.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
You got to have a little bit of research. You got to know what you're getting into, like the school. You got to know what objectives, or alignment with what your school has, things that they're promoting, things that they do. Don't just walk into your first interview not knowing anything that the school does, plans they have in place. When I came to Cedar Falls, I would love being back in the area. I want to be a part of the community. I want to be here forever with the family. I enjoyed their PLC process from going through that, talking with former teachers. The standard-based grading stuff, how that interested me. There's a docket of things that that they're doing and that they're promoting that you at least have an idea. So it shows that you have at least invested a little bit of time into that job that you want to be a part of. You know, you're always going to get asked, why choose us? Generally the last question before they ask you if there's any questions, you know. You should always be prepared going in with a couple. You'll have 3, you'll forget 2 of them, but you have that one that you know you can nail down. And also kind of being reflective too. I'm never good at talking about strength. That's when I start rambling, because I don't like talking about me being good at something. But you want to be able to express, you know, they're trying to pick you out of a pool of a bunch of people. You know, you got to be able to promote why you are the best candidate for that, but not go too far on top of that. You just relax. You know, you go and you're going to be sweaty, relaxed, freaked out. Once you sit down, it's game on, and just be yourself. If they don't hire you, you probably might not have been a great fit with that group of people. And I'm not always, but just be your personable self. So
I think those are really great tips, especially the one about knowing school. You spend an undergraduate degree as a history student learning how to do research. That is an important part of the job seeking process as well, is to do your homework and know what it is you are trying to join. Is it a good fit? And so I think those are some really excellent practical tips that you've shared. We're coming close to the end of our Zoom session, so I'll thank everyone for coming out, and we'll go ahead and sign off. We thank Colby and all of our guests.